Welcome to part two on this presentation dealing with the voyage planning in a changing world. And I would like to remind those who followed part one that there is a second version of it on YouTube because I had to make some corrections. There were some technical issues, but also I added some more material to that first part. So I hope that those who have already seen the first part, but not version 2, should please look at it because it is indeed greatly improved. So let's go on with this presentation, which for you who already know, but some who may not have watched the first presentation, is to say that the main purpose of this presentation is to show that even in today's world with the changing climate and the consequences on voyage planning, it is still possible to plan, undertake, and complete in safety longer or shorter voyage. So for planning, I revert to the concept of voyage planning generally, and the basic purpose of it is how to plan around the world voyage by taking advantage of the most favorable and maybe I should add now also safe sailing conditions and avoid critical areas and seasons. So at some point we'll start along this around the world voyage, which as you see from the map on the screen is very comprehensive. It takes even voyages to Antarctica and to the Northwest Passage. We're not going to deal with them at this time because the purpose of this example on how to plan this around the world voyage, or perhaps not only a transatlantic or transpacific voyage, is to show how it can be done nowadays by knowing what to expect and also by being prepared for the conditions and the consequences of climate change. I start with the pilot charts, which I describe as the navigator's best friend. Some of you, I'm sure, are not aware of this navigational tool that has been in circulation for the last 200 years. The first man who conceived a pilot chart was the American Lieutenant Maury, who almost exactly 200 years ago started collecting information from the masters, the captains of ships that made the transatlantic voyage. And he brought all that information into what is now historically the very first pilot chart to be published in 1852. And it shows the data as collected by him, but not in a numerical fashion, but using a lot of words, the months and so on, very difficult to interpret. What is very interesting, that very shortly afterwards, in 1853, a British chart was published on the same concept of a pilot chart that bring together all the information gathered from ship's masters and so on, but in a fashion and in a display that is very close to the pilot charts of today. And this is the Madagascar and the southern Africa, and you can see already the wind charts, and you get an idea of the strengths from the lengths of those arrows and so on. Pilot charts continue to be published up to about 40 years ago. They were updated continuously, always based on information and data gathered from ships' captains and navigators. But from about 40 years ago, they have not been updated. And just over 20 years ago, with my son Ivan, we decided that there was time for us to do this job ourselves. And fortunately, we managed to obtain satellite observations taken by NASA and NOAA satellites over the previous 25 years and published in 2011 the first atlas. By now, we are at the third edition, which was published last year. And this is based on data gathered again on the previously 25 years on winds, currents, tropical storms, etc. But Also, we decided that only to use the wind data for the last 25 years and the tropical storm data of the last 10 to 12 years, because that is one area which has suffered mostly from the consequences of climate change. Now, for you who are not familiar with pilot charts, this is how an old pilot charts look. And the most important thing to see on that pilot chart is the direction and the strength of the winds in a windrows. Also shown on the old charts were the tracks of hurricane season, cyclones or hurricanes for a given month. So what we've done with Ivan, we've decided to simplify the whole information and data contained in each page of the atlas. And this is the the North Pacific Ocean in September. What you see here are the windroses, and I'll explain them in more detail later, but also the high pressure cells, the atmospheric area that is critical and where tropical storms have been recorded between the west coast of the United States, all the way to China and Japan and Southeast Asia. And that is a first. Before, the information on tropical storms was shown by just the arrows showing the tracks of hurricanes, and our decision was to make it much clearer by showing an entire area which is critical and which also means for us planning a voyage that it should be avoided. So I'm coming back now to the windrows. In this latest edition of our, it's called actually the Cornells Ocean Atlas, we have the windroses, and each windrose is, as you can see there, shows the distribution of winds from 8 cardinal points, and the arrows fly with the wind, and their length show the percentage of the total number of the observations in which the wind has blown from that cardinal point. And I must point out here that every single windrose in the latest atlas is based on 228,000 observations, satellite observations. So the number of feathers shows the force of the wind, 2, 3, 4, as you can see, and which has been recorded most frequently from that sector. The wind force is measured on the Beaufort scale, and with each feather showing the equivalent to 1 unit of wind force, so that 4 feathers represent an average force of Beaufort 4 from that direction. However, in some cases, the arrow would be too long, and in that case, we have reduced it from 25% upwards, and we only indicate the percentage of wind from that direction. And also in the middle of the circle, you can see the percentage of calms in blue and percentage of winds over 4.7 in red. And finally, the ocean currents are shown as a green arrow, indicating their prevailing direction, while the rate is in knots. In this case, it is 0.1 of a knot. So again, I want to show you another page of the atlas. And here you can see that what we've done, again, for the first time, we've taken all the data between 2 points, for example, San Francisco to Hawaii, to just give an example, or Panama to Galapagos, and it is summarized in one of what we call a windgram. And I'll come to the windgrams in a moment. But basically, we have tried to give as much information as possible to small boat sailors, i.e. pleasure sailers, or for owners of sailing yachts planning to set off on an ocean passage or perhaps on a world voyage. So here is a windgram. It shows the winds between San Diego and the Marquesas in in April. And the colors indicate the wind strength on the Beaufort scale from dark blue, which is force 4, to light blue, force 5, and green, force 7. And the arrow points to the destination. And here a description here why it is so important to use or to be able to look up and consult the new atlas. For example, if you're starting off on a voyage to the Mediterranean or to the Canary Islands from Western Europe, you want to know when you cross the Bay of Biscay, where the weather sometimes can be quite bad. When is the best time to cross when the conditions will be least bad, not best, but in any case, not as bad as in other months. And I have given here on the left-hand side the wind gram for the month of June, and on the right-hand side, the wind gram from the month of September. And you can see that September is definitely a much better month, although by having more green at the top of the wedges, the winds are stronger. So it's a choice of leaving early in the summer, in June, where the winds are from all directions. But in principle, as you can see, sailing to La Coruña, the winds are favorable, or to leave later in the year, when the winds are stronger and perhaps a bit more favorable. Also, for anyone who is planning a voyage from the United States East Coast, is a comparison. At the end of the safe hurricane season in the Eastern Caribbean, which is basically the month of April or May, although now we encourage everyone to leave earlier rather than later because of the consequences of climate change. So I've given here for the month of April, how you have a choice. If you want to sail directly from the Virgin Islands to the Chesapeake Bay, you can see on the left-hand side at the bottom, it's a mixture of winds, some of them quite strong, and so on. The conditions to sail just to Bermuda and continue from there onwards to a northern destination are quite similar. However, if you sail from the Virgin Islands to Miami, you can see you have much better sailing conditions, virtually following winds, and then you can decide that you may prefer to sail directly to Miami and then sail in easy stages along the East Coast, or perhaps even take the intercoastal waterway system. So another example that is being dealt with in the new atlas is the hurricane seasons are very active, and an example is the hurricane season in the northeastern Pacific. In 2023 was very, very active. And the official, up until recently, the official hurricane season in the northeastern part of the Pacific was from June to November. Well, that has changed because, as I can show you here, now this is the month of May, and you can see on the right-hand side that there already hurricanes have been recorded off the coast of Mexico and in Southern California as early in May. And here is a table, which I'll leave on the screen for you to consult, and you can see that the latest and the earliest hurricanes in that part of the world, and you can see from left onwards, 2012, one hurricane in May from 20 to 26, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hurricanes out of 12 years that have occurred off the coast of Mexico or Southern California. So this is a very good indication of what this atlas would show, and also why it is now highly recommended that anyone sailing in that area should leave Mexico or Baja California by April and sail into an area which is not affected by tropical storms rather than wait longer. And similarly, you can see there are already now 2 or 3 early hurricanes that occurred at the end of October. So again, you should plan to leave that area earlier than before, meaning don't wait until November, but if possible, leave the area before the end of October. So the plan was to take around the world in 80 minutes, like Jules Verne took someone on a hypothetical voyage around the world in 80 days. I only show you, again, this chart of the world with the various routes, because we will be planning to sail on this hypothetical voyage on the most popular route, that goes through the Panama Canal and then continues around the Cape of Good Hope. So we're coming back to the start of this voyage, and we see here that in June, when boats starting from Europe are aware that June is already the hurricane season in the North Atlantic. However, as you can see from this chart in the Atlas, the hurricanes in June are still restricted or only affecting the western part of the North Atlantic. So June is quite a safe month to sail from Northern Europe down to the Mediterranean or continue to the Canary Islands. And here I'm going to show you, if you start across the Bay of Biscay from the port of Falmouth and you sail to northwestern Spain to La Coruña, the winds in June are fairly good. And certainly from there, when you continue from La Coruña to Cape St. Vincent, you will benefit from the so-called Portuguese trade winds, which are very strong. You can see they go up to 4.7 Beaufort. But so it means that you have very, very good winds continuing all the way. And if you have gone into the Mediterranean, you will be sailing from Gibraltar and you decide to leave the Mediterranean in September, which is normally what most boats do, you will have very good sailing conditions from the Canary Islands, from Gibraltar to the Canary Islands. You can see very strong winds, force 4, force 5, and a very fast passage. So here is the port of Las Palmas, where I started with the first arc in 1986, and the arc transatlantic rally still continues to this day. There's an excellent port, which is all, this is in the commercial harbor of Gran Canaria, of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, but the right-hand side of it is always reserved for visiting yachts. And this is where the arc starts every year on its passage to the Caribbean. So again, we come to planning. Until recently, and certainly when I ran the arc in 1986 until 1999, we always started from the Canary Islands late in November, very often the last weekend in November. However, the situation has changed. As you can see on this chart, the area of the hurricanes in November is quite extensive, although it doesn't reach Europe, but you certainly have to take it into account by the time you arrive in the Caribbean. And for that reason, we always recommend to start in late November from the Canary Islands and plan on arriving in the Eastern Caribbean not before the beginning of December, which, as you can see from this chart, by December, the area is hurricane-free. So going back now from the Canary Islands to St. Lucia, you'll see that there are very good winds, although in part one I said that the trade winds are not as consistent as they used to be in the past. But on this trade wind route, mostly from the Canary Islands to St. Lucia, the winds are favorable. However, there's a point that I would like to make here. Sorry, I have to go back here. Is that sailing from the Canary Islands to St. Lucia, the practice until recently, certainly many, many years ago, it was always not to sail directly from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean, but to sail southwest to the Cape Verde Islands or close to the Cape Verde Islands, and then pick up the direct route once you pass the Cape Verde Islands. And you can see here very clearly by watching also the wind grams that sailing directly from the Canary Islands to St. Lucia is the shortest route, but I can assure you it's not the fastest route. You have not such consistent winds on the direct route, whereas by sailing south to the Cape Verde Islands, you reach the area which even now, when the trade winds are not so consistent in other parts of the world, in those latitudes, the trade winds, the northeasterly trade winds, are still very reliable. And this is why the majority of transatlantic passages would be planned to leave the Canary Islands, but not sail direct, but southwest and then west. And then you make landfall in a place like Barbados and Lucia, or maybe even Antigua, which is a bit further north. It's the most beautiful place and a fantastic anchorage after the long passage. I'll take you very quickly out of the Caribbean because we have to continue with our round the world voyage of planning it. In any case, at some point before the end of the safe season, probably by April, you plan to sail west on our hypothetical round the world voyage. And you can see that from Antigua to Panama, the winds are absolutely perfect, maybe almost too perfect for some taste because they are quite strong. And you can see again in the windgram, in the wages, that there's quite a high proportion of force 6 winds. So 4 is blue, 5 is light blue, and green is 7. So for boats that would start from the United States East Coast, this is the point where they should join this hypothetical around the world voyage. Coming from Miami, I have only given Miami in this instance, but the boat would be in Panama, the rest of the boat that has started from the Eastern Caribbean, probably by late April. These are the winds for late April from Miami to the Windward Passage, very good winds, and continue just as good winds all the way to Panama. And then we've reached Panama. The Pacific is wide open in front of us with all those options, which we will take advantage of in part 3, where I will describe the continuation of the voyage all the way to New Zealand. There are the options here to sailing from Panama directly to the Marquesas and French Polynesia, or via the Galapagos Islands, or a much more attractive and perhaps challenging route, like I have done on my first voyage, to sail down from Panama to Peru, then to Easter Island, and reach French Polynesia that way. So this is all now for our next installment. And I want to make a notice at the end to say that although the presentation is recorded on YouTube, I would like to draw attention to the fact that it should not be used or copied without permission. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to describing the continuation of our round the world voyage in part 3. Goodbye.